mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power. Spirit, draw near. Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power. Spirit, draw near. Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power. Spirit, draw near. Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power. Spirit, draw near. Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the body. Spirit, draw near. Spirit, draw near.
AJ, I use he and him pronouns, and I'm one of the ministers here at First Unitarian, where our mission is that through spiritual connection in community, we listen deeply to others and ourselves, we open to wonder and transformation, and we serve together with love and humility. We acknowledge with respect the Seneca Nation, keepers of the Western Door, and part of the Haudenosaunee people on whose ancestral and contemporary lands First Unitarian now stands. If you are new or new-ish here at our church community, we invite you to stop by the welcome desk so we can help you get connected and we can learn a little bit more about you. If you are here because you're going through a hard time or you're worried about somebody else who is, please reach out, connect. We have a lay pastoral care associate here in the sanctuary who can connect during or after the worship service. We also have one online in the chat. We've got a couple announcements I want to let you all know about. Of course, this upcoming week is Thanksgiving, and we here at First Unitarian are very honored and excited to be the host site for the Rochester Interfaith Thanksgiving service. So here in the sanctuary at 11 a.m. on Thanksgiving morning, we will have that. We'll be inviting our interfaith guests and be having that service here together. On December 3rd, there will be only one service, worship service at 9:15. There will be programming for children and families at the usual 11:30 time, but there won't be a worship service here in the sanctuary because we'll be preparing for a 3 p.m. ordination service for Reverend Vertus LeVar Robinson. So please come join us for that. We're very excited to celebrate Reverend Vertus and his ministry, and also to welcome the newly elected president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt, will be preaching the sermon. So we're excited to welcome her as well. And then December 10th is our Greater Good service, the worship service kickoff for the campaign that we do every year, our Greater Good campaign. You may have seen in the newsletter, we have recently announced the recipients, this year's recipients for the Greater Good fundraising. They are voted on and selected by our youth and children. So they have selected this year person-centered housing options and Family Promise of Greater Rochester. Both organizations working to serve unhoused populations. The Family Promise of Greater Rochester, formerly known as RAIN, focuses on families undergoing temporary houselessness, and Person-Centered Housing Options focuses on serving the chronically unhoused. So we'll be raising a bunch of money for them, both of those organizations, and the projects that they're working on to improve their infrastructure, to build more and furnish more apartments so that they can give people these temporary housing support. So we'll be learning more about these organizations over the next couple weeks, and today we have a video from Family Promise to share a little bit about the work that they're doing.
The best way to go is down these stairs, out the door to the right. We're a hardy bunch, you know, this, so that you don't trip.
I feel like it's the first thing you see.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think that looks
And
great.
it's really important that they have their own space and dignity and somewhere they can cook meals and hang out with their kids. And so we partner with the local landlord and rent spaces like this one, where there's a kid's bedroom, and we provide towels and linens and toiletries and food if they need it, where they can kind of settle, right? Because it's really traumatic not to have your own space and your own things. Thank you. Where we just were is the day center. So on the first floor we have all sorts of in-kind donations, and it's where staff work and families can meet with staff there. Upstairs, we have apartments now, and those are transitioning into a new program. We'll have a small number of apartments where families will actually be able to sign a lease and be a part of the program longer.
Lisa, on fire!
Now, as I invite up Ruth to light our chalice, wherever you are online, invite you to light a chalice where you may be. And here in the sanctuary, invite you to center yourself in whatever way helps you with a breath or settling into your chair as Ruth lights our chalice and we read the unison words together. Life is a gift for which we are grateful. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and the mysteries of this great gift.
Good morning. My name is Elise Wall. I use she and her pronouns. I used to work for a small nonprofit hospice and bereavement organization, and one of the programs we offered was called Herbie's Friends. It was a 6-week program for families with young children who had experienced the death of a loved one. Each week, the families would gather with our professional staff and our specially trained volunteers, share a meal together, and then break up into groups. Now, the adults had their own group, and children were grouped with similar-aged kids. The children's facilitators used storytelling and music, games, and crafts to help the children explore their own grief and to help normalize the process. And also, they helped them learn strategies for coping with some of their really big, hard feelings about the death of their loved one. Now, some of the facilitators were also registered therapy dog teams. So we were lucky enough to have at least 4 therapy dog teams with each session. And the presence of those animals had the effect of just reducing everyone's anxiety. They were real popular. The handlers would also tell the story of the dog's loss, the loss that the dog had experienced in their life, in order to help the children and maybe some of the adults understand the universality of death. Now, one time there was a little girl in the 6 to 8-year-old group who was very withdrawn. She would occasionally draw, she would sit quietly during circle time. She would listen to the other children tell their stories of how their loved one died, but she wasn't ready to tell her own story. She would not engage with the other children or with the facilitators. Now, this group was lucky enough to have a therapy dog team with them for the entire 6 weeks. A beautiful Sheltie named Charlie and his handler. Charlie was very popular. He was calm, he was present, and he was also very soft. Now, it came to the 6th week of the program, and the little girl finally felt safe enough to tell the story of how her mother had died. She didn't tell it to the children, she didn't tell it to the facilitators, she told it to Charlie, the therapy dog. And isn't that why we come to church? Sometimes our feelings are so big and so hard we can't even speak. Here we may find people who offer us patience and allow us to feel safe before telling our own stories. And here we can practice offering that patience to others and maybe being a little bit more like Charlie, the therapy dog. I invite you now to greet your neighbors, rise as you are able. If you're online, type a greeting in the chat. And when you see the choir come up here into their place, that's your time to be quiet again.
still find your way. You will always find your way. If you set your heart on compassion, you just turn and look inside, and the love you will find will be your guide, will be your guide.
Our reading this morning comes to us from John O'Donohue, Irish poet and priest. It is entitled, For Death. From the moment you were born, your death has walked beside you. Though it seldom shows its face, you still feel its empty touch when fear invades your life, or what you love is lost, or inner damage is incurred. Yet when destiny draws you into these spaces of poverty and your heart stays generous until some door opens into the light, you are quietly befriending your death, so that you will have no need to fear when your time comes to turn and leave, that the silent presence of your death would call your life to attention, wake you up to how scarce your time is and the urgency to become free and equal to the call of your destiny, that you would gather yourself and decide carefully how you now can live the life you would love to look back on from your deathbed.
I invite you now into a time of meditation, reflection, and prayer, beginning with shared silence within the sanctuary and beyond. I invite you to get in a comfortable position in your seat and focus on your own breath. Breathing in peace, breathing out anything that does not serve you anymore. What if our mortal lives were like the most elegant aspects just recently revealed of the black hole at the center of our galaxy? What if the fractal nature of reality was not mere conjecture, but empirical truth? By which I mean that the macro is the micro, and the micro is the macro. By which I mean that the message is the method, and the method is the message. By which I mean that as our lives approach that point so dense we cannot fathom it, and thus call it oblivion, at that point, our existence burns brightest, shows itself for what it has always been, part and particle of vastness, with collective shape, warped and wobbly, yet an unbroken circle. Whole, perhaps holy, our small lives essential for the illumination of great mystery, even if it remains beyond our comprehension, remains beyond our grasp, remains beyond. Amen. We enter now into ritual to bring what is on our hearts and lay it on the altar of community and spirit. Honoring the complexities of life, bring to mind whatever grief, growth, and gratitude is alive within you. Online, you're invited to share in the chat, and here in the sanctuary, you're invited forward to light a candle. If you would like an usher to bring you a candle, please raise your hand. May we now share in this ritual of community care and witness to one another's heart. All that we hold in our hearts for ourselves, for each other, and for the world is held in this community and by a love that will not let us go. Amen.
So
I'm Bob Ames, and my wife and I have been members of this congregation for 40 years. People often ask me how it came about that I started volunteering at the hospice house, at the Advent House in Fairport. Well, one day I was driving to Eastview Mall, and the car turned into the driveway. It did. The car turned into the driveway. Now, for Unitarians, that's pretty doggone spiritual, isn't it? I parked the car, and I went inside, and I started talking with the volunteer coordinator. We had a good conversation, and in the course of the conversation, she said to me, "How do you feel about changing depends?" Well, I never thought about it. That was 9 years ago, and I volunteer one shift per week. I'll be there this afternoon during the Bills game. That might be spiritual, too. New York State allows two-bed comfort care homes. These are technically not hospice houses. They're an extension of home care. They provide compassionate care for the dying and help residents to live their last days in comfort. They are community funded, receiving no money from the government or any insurance reimbursements. Everything is through donation and fundraising. There are 11 such homes in the Rochester area and about 40 of them throughout the state. A few years ago, you might recall, that Isaiah House was the winner of one of our Greater Good, and they're located right here in downtown Rochester. All these homes need volunteers. The homes are primarily staffed by volunteers. We bathe, dress, feed, toilet, and administer all medications. But more important, we provide emotional support to friends and family and the resident. Okay, now. There was Sharon, who told me that our commonly used phrases, "it is what it is," and "God knows," really take on a special deep meaning when you're dying in a hospice bed. Residents have diverse needs. Some people want a lot of company. Others want to spend time in their own silent space. I think about Louisa, who asked me to stay in the room with her as she took a nap. She didn't want to wake up into an empty room. She wanted someone there. It's a scary time, and she needed some comforting presence. I've learned not to tell my stories. They're really not interested. It's a time for them, the resident, to tell their stories to me and to put their life and their legacy in order. You know when it's really tough is when the person is a young person. There was Paul. He was 6 feet 3 inches tall, longer than the bed. He was in his 30s. He had enjoyed basketball. He had a lovely wife and 2 young children. And it hurt me. My heart hurt when I was with Paul. I went to the director and told her about that. She said, "Bob, maybe you need to take some time off. Maybe you need to step away." And then just like my car pulling into the driveway, I don't know where these words came from, but I said, "No, maybe it's time for me to step forward and to continue to be a member of Paul's team." A few months ago, Mary, a resident exactly my age, was excited to tell me that a high school friend had traveled a great distance to be with her. Mary and her friend had been very close friends since high school, but then an incident drove them apart. They hadn't seen each other in years. Their time together during the visit was like they'd never been apart. And then Mary told me, "If you have a friend or family member that you're estranged from, don't wait. Call them. Well, of course, the next morning, I made a phone call. Bruce had a lot of friends. He was a cool guy. One of his friends said to me, "You know, Bruce is more ready to go than we are to have him leave us." One evening, a few months ago, I was alone in the room with William. His breathing was labored and rattling. Later, it settled down to be more regular, but very slow. I stayed with William, and then it was quiet. I remember I had my arm on his forearm, my hand on his forearm. It is what it is. God knows. Well, it's Thanksgiving, and I'm grateful for the life I have. And when my time comes, I hope that I can be as graceful as the people I have met while I've been volunteering. Amen.
Thank you, Bob. Everything our church does for ourselves and others is made possible by what we bring to it. Each week, we practice shared generosity to support the work and witness of Unitarian Universalism in Rochester, and half of our Sunday offering goes to a partner organization working to create a more just and loving world. Today, we share our plate with Metro Justice, a progressive, member-driven grassroots organization dedicated to social, economic, and racial justice in Rochester. With around 1,000 members, their Fight for Economic Justice campaign works to put an end to the incredible wealth inequality and the poverty that our city experiences. In the spirit of abundance and generosity, our offering will now be received with gratitude.
Everybody's wondering what and where they all came from. Everybody's worrying about where they're gonna go when the whole thing's done. But nobody knows for certain, and so it's all the same to me. I think I'll just let the mystery be. Some say once gone, you're gone forever, and some say you're gonna come back. Some say you rest in the arms of the Savior if in sinful ways you lack. Some say that they're coming back as a garden full of bunch of carrots and sweet little peas. I think I'll just let the mystery be. Everybody's wondering what and where they all came from. Everybody's worrying about where they're gonna go when the whole thing's done. But nobody knows for certain, and so it's all the same to me. I think I'll just let the mystery be. Some say they're going to a place called glory, and I ain't saying it ain't a fact. But I've heard that I'm on the road to purgatory, and I don't like the sound of that. I believe my love, and I live my life accordingly. But I choose to let this mystery be. Everybody's wondering what and where they all came from. Everybody's worrying about where they're gonna go when the whole thing's done. But no one knows for certain, and so it's all the same to me. I think I'll just let the mystery be. I think I'll just let the mystery be.
Thank you, Pablo, for that beautiful rendition of what was a song that was not, to my knowledge, written in any relationship to Unitarian Universalism, but certainly serves as a very classic Unitarian Universalist song, especially if we're talking about our pluralism and our, especially around questions related to death and the afterlife. Because, of course, I can, as a Unitarian Universalist, pluralist, mystic, comfortably say that while there are many different answers to the questions of life and death provided by many religions and philosophies, I don't actually need a single firm explanation. I don't need to know precisely what happens at or after death, how I might experience that, in order to live a life of depth and meaning and values. And yet, research and experience shows that for people on hospice or otherwise in the process of dying, those who have an answer for what death means and what might or might not come next tend to have an easier time of it, an easier time finding acceptance of their death. They're able to process this great transition both within themselves and with friends and family and loved ones. Like Bob shared, even if it's pithy, just a sense of it is what it is and God knows, or it's in God's hands, sometimes that's enough of a theology of death. And the research shows that it doesn't matter so much what the answer is. It's not that people who believe in an afterlife of union with God face death more easily than those who don't, or that a belief in reincarnation really does the trick, or that a scientific materialist, there is nothing after death answer yields quantifiably better results. Elise put it this way when we met to prepare for this service from her experience working in hospice: two things that helped people the most were accepting that this body will die and feeling comfortable with what they believe comes next. So it matters less what the theological answer or understanding of death is. What matters is that there is an answer, and one that brings comfort. Now, I don't think the conclusion that we should take here is one of theological relativism, that, well, humans can be comforted by just about anything, so it doesn't really matter. No, I think what's going on is that different people are comforted by different things. Different theologies make different sense to different people. Believing that death is the end of this consciousness, that may be deeply unsettling to somebody and comforting to another. There is no one-size-fits-all answer. But this also doesn't mean that all the answers don't matter and that they're all equal in how they help. The same song that says, "No one knows for certain, so it's all the same to me," also includes the line, "And I've heard that I'm on the road to purgatory, and I don't like the sound of that." It's understandably almost goes without saying that it's more comforting to imagine an afterlife that you do like the sound of than one that you don't. For people with a theology of the afterlife that's even less comforting than purgatory, one that involves perhaps a hell of punishment as a possibility, the prospect of death can be terrifying. If lying on your deathbed means worrying, was I a good enough person to get into heaven? That can be stressful, discomforting. No one is perfect, and no one knows one's own worst failings better than one's own self. And depending on your beliefs about God, it can be daunting to think if you've lived up to divine standards. Or to take a more strictly Calvinist theology of predestination, one that sought to address some of the problems in the good works gets you into heaven theology. In that system, your fate was determined before you were ever born, whether you were among the saved destined for heaven or those doomed to hell, and you don't find out until you get there. Terrifying, right? That is a theology that even as a committed pluralist, I am happy to denounce that theology. I'm so glad to be a universalist, to be in a religious tradition that says if there is a heaven, everyone goes there. A tradition that says whatever happens when we die, it happens to all of us equally and the same, and there is no torture involved. So no, not all theologies are created equal. Some are decidedly going to be more comforting. Some are more ethical. Some are frankly more logically or theologically palatable than others. And there is a bit of the relativism that what is palatable or comforting to one person may be utterly bizarre and perplexing to another. Again, we can hold both things as true, and I think we must as Unitarian Universalists, that it really matters what one's theological beliefs are, what their answers are about the mysteries of life and death, without demanding that your answers must be the same as my answers and that person's answers. There's no one size fits all. One of the dimensions from which we might assess theologies of death, for instance, would be to ask, how does this belief or understanding ask me to live differently? Like the John O'Donohue reading from earlier, which cautions the reader to carefully decide how to live a life that can be looked back on at one's deathbed with peace. Does a theology of there is no life after death lead me to treat this life with greater or lesser reverence? Does a belief in an afterlife lead me to squander my time in this life, or does it help me connect with those who have gone before? Does a belief in justice being meted out after death lead me to allow and accommodate injustice in this life because I feel the scales will be evened later? Or does it inspire me in my own moral living? Is death an enemy that I must resist at every turn? Or is death a destiny which, when the time is right, I can face with serenity? As I'm fond of repeating the line from UU religious educator Sophia Foz, it matters what we believe. And it matters how we interpret those beliefs and how we act in accordance with those beliefs. And so I encourage you, if you have not done this, and if you haven't done it recently, consider what your theology of death might be. What do you think happens at or after death? What does it mean to you that you will die? Even if ultimately you're going to let the mystery be, what would you like to be true? What would you or what could you live your life as if it were true? I encourage this spiritual work, this theological work, and frankly, this ethical work as it informs our behavior, because I think it's an important part of befriending death for Unitarian Universalists. Now, this befriending death business is the topic of my sermon today, both because it's a perennial topic of universal relevance for us human mortal beings, and also specifically because, well, Nanette won the bid for my auction sermon at the auction last spring. And while she could have given me a particular question to wrestle with, or a text to explore, or a song to divulge the meaning of, which, by the way, if you would like to do and provide such inspiration or challenge, be sure to participate in the auction in the spring and bid on the sermon topic. But for Nanette, she simply provided me the topic of befriending death. Now, there's obviously a lot of directions that one could and should take this topic in, but at least one aspect of this befriending death process is, I think, developing and articulating a theology of death, an understanding of death, because to be friends with someone or something is to know something about it. Not everything. We never know everything about our friends, let alone our own selves. But a relationship rests in knowing something about the other. And so perhaps we can have some sense of knowledge about death. And again, it doesn't mean that I have all the answers or that my answer must be the same as others. It doesn't mean that I will never change or update my answers, my theology, but it means I have a relationship, a sense of my own mortality and what death might be or what might come next. And befriending death doesn't mean that I'm 100% happy with death all the time. Just because we're friends with someone doesn't mean that we're never upset at them. It doesn't mean we don't have fights, we don't get disappointed, we don't have periods of greater or lesser trust or connection with them. But staying friends with someone means we're in relationship with them. We don't deny their existence. We accept the things about them that we can't change. We seek to learn from them what we can. Now, so far, I've focused on the issue of one's own mortality, making friends with your own death. But of course, we each will die only once, whereas each of us has had and will have many visits with death when someone else that we know and love dies. We can maybe increase the quality of our relationship with death by getting more proximate, perhaps by volunteering in a hospice setting, or simply being more open to the conversations with our loved ones, to talk about death and make them a friend and a part of our families. But it's true that most of our relationship with death is in the context of this permanent loss of other people from our lives. Well, almost permanent, or perhaps permanent but not a complete loss. I make this caveat not because I hold a particular theology of identity or consciousness persisting after death, but rather because of one of the things that Nanette shared with me as we prepared for this sermon. It was something that her therapist said about loss. Just because the person dies doesn't mean that the relationship dies. Part of our friendship with death, our relationship with death, might be the relationships with those who have died, both the ancestors lost to memory and those that we knew personally who have joined the mystery ahead of us. Well, of course, death changes the relationship. It has to. I think there's so much value in seeing that the relationship is not ended, the book is not closed forever, but the relationship is still alive. And still engaging in that relationship is important, even if maybe we need some help sometimes to get there. If you haven't heard yet, there's something that's special that's been added to our memorial gardens that may help with this. Near the wall where it is etched, "To live in hearts that love is not to die," there is a tree, and attached to this tree is now an old school telephone with a cord and wherever you put up an old phone. But it's not connected to any phone line or cell service, certainly. It's called a telephone of the wind. And as you might imagine, there's a whole backstory as to how these telephones started popping up, and a whole movement has evolved to get these phones set up in memorial gardens and other public locations, and our memorial garden is now one of those. The simple version is that people are invited, and people do use these phones to call their dearly departed loved ones and have a conversation with them. These phones become a prop or an aid to having this conversation. There's something mystical and magical about this, I think. It's like in Elise's opening words this morning, sometimes it can be too hard to talk to a living human friend, or we might say different things to them than we would perhaps to Charlie the Sheltie, the therapy dog. Sometimes it's hard to know how to begin to talk to someone who has passed away, but if we pick up a phone, we know how to start a conversation on the phone. Sometimes it helps to personify who or what we are in relationship with, even if they are not a living person in this world or aren't any longer. Or even if they are not so much a person, but death that we are trying to have a relationship with. We can simply personify it. Now, when I say personifying death, I really am not encouraging a foreboding persona like the Grim Reaper that we may have seen around the recent Halloween holidays. Nor do I mean the ghost of Christmas future, right, that appears to Scrooge in A Christmas Carol. But I mean more like a version of death found in Neil Gaiman's The Sandman. Death who reminds her brother, the Sandman, the king of dreams, that their role as these cosmic aspects of human experience, these endless beings, their job is not to invoke fear and trembling and some kind of respect. Their job as dream and death and desire and even despair is to serve humanity as faithful companions. And so again, how we personify death may suggest and reveal a lot about our own personal theology of death. It might indicate the quality of our relationship with death, and even with life, too. Dutch priest Henry Nouwen writes, "So many of our doubts and hesitations, ambivalences and insecurities are bound up with our deep-seated fear of death, that our lives would be significantly different if we could relate to death as a familiar guest instead of as a threatening stranger." If you had the opportunity to speak to death or to your own death, what would you want to say? You might have questions, though death might not have any answers, but what would you feel was important to say to death? Would death seem like a familiar guest or a threatening stranger? Personally, I imagine death and personify death more in the tradition of the ferryman from ancient Greek cosmology, a companion who oversees this great transition. Except my ferryman is one of two twins, and I'll explain. Since I understand myself, that what I am is little more than an emergent localization of the energy and matter of the universe coming together for a temporary period of time to be this thing that my temporary consciousness calls self. Death then is simply the transition when this emergent pattern changes enough that that awareness and that body has gone back to the energy and matter of the universe. And so death is that transition, but it's not the first transition like that I have made, is it? Death's twin, of course, is birth. The guardian of the transition out of the void and into existence, which, like death, no one can quite give a first-person account of, even though we've all been there. And so this transition between the matter and energy of the universe and into any one individual life, this is very much on my mind as my wife and I prepare to welcome our first child into the world in January. What will this child's relationship be with life, with death, with existing rather than not existing, but knowing that it is temporary? Well, my theology, my sense of death demands that I approach this sacred transition for my child. And of course, the holy process that my wife is experiencing as the one giving birth, and certainly the one I'm experiencing as well, that I approach this transition with reverence and care, just as I must approach my own mortality, seeing it for what it is, and best as I can, shaking hands with death. Birth and death are two mysteries that each living being must encounter. Birth and death are both reminders of how little control we really have and how transitional and temporary our lives are. Both are very holy and sacred moments of transition, of ultimate importance to the individual experiencing them and to those that love them, and also so very ordinary, happening every single day. Each birth and death uniquely unfolding, but every life bearing the same beginning and same ending. Birth and death are human realities that we cannot help but have relationships with. As I'm reminded of the words of UU minister Forrest Church, Religion is the human response to being alive and having to die. So friendship may not be how you will name your relationship with death. I can understand that framing may not work for everyone. But I do want to leave you with the challenge and the encouragement to have a relationship with death, to reflect on and articulate your beliefs about death, what it means, what might or might not come next. Because we are alive, and we do have to die. And the truth is, we don't have to make meaning of it all, but if we do, if we face rather than deny this relationship, we may find that death becomes much more a familiar friend and much less a terrifying stranger. May it be so. Come, let us rise in body and spirit to sing hymn 1008, When Our Heart is in a Holy Place.
When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we trust the wisdom in each of us, every color, every creed and pride, and we see our faces in each other's eyes, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we tell a story from deep inside, and we listen with a love in mind, and we hear our voices in each other's words, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we share the silence of sacred space, and the God of our hearts stirs within, and we feel the power of each other's faith, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, when our hearts with love and amazing grace, when our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place.
For those willing and able, please help us stack chairs. Only the chairs with arms after the service. The others can just stay right where they are. And now please join me in extinguishing our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. From the moment you were born, your death has walked beside you. May you ever deepen this relationship on this journey, letting love be your guide, living and loving, giving and receiving the mysteries of both life and death. I love you all. Go in peace.